We begin the day with what must be the most perverted use of the word party. Now, that's the term Syrian prison guards reportedly use to describe the secret campaign of mass killings that have gone on uninterrupted since 2011. The perverted party is just a sample of the horrors and the murders brought to light today in a report by Amnesty International entitled The Human Slaughterhouse. Now, this is not easy reading. Accounts from inside Saydnaya prison near Damascus, up to 13,000 hangings, sometimes 50 per night, along with bogus trials, torture, inmates forced to rape other inmates, all because they dared to criticize the Assad regime. Now, Assad's culture of impunity is thriving even tonight, while the rest of the world continues to let it continue. Our coverage begins with this report.
More than anything, the Syrian war is a brutal campaign against the country's own population. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been killed and thousands more have disappeared, many to the Saydnaya military prison north of Damascus. Now, Amnesty International has published devastating details about events that took place behind the walls of this notorious prison. Its report claims over the past few years, thousands of inmates were killed without a proper trial.
The new findings in this report are about a systematic campaign of mass hangings, whereby every week, usually on Mondays and Wednesdays, groups of detainees, of between 20 to 50 detainees, would be taken from their cells, told that they would be transferred to civilian detentions. But instead of that, they were taken to a cell in another building inside of Saydnaya, where they would be hanged.
Amnesty spoke to more than 80 witnesses, including former prisoners, lawyers, even prison guards. What they report is horrifying, like this from a lawyer from Aleppo. When we were beaten in front of the cells, I saw a lot of blood on the floor. There was a rancid and bloody smell. Amnesty has used these eyewitness reports to create a series of illustrations. The pictures show huge numbers of prisoners sharing overcrowded cells with other prisoners and corpses. According to Amnesty, prison guards deliberately allowed people to starve or die of thirst. They would often tip food onto the blood-smeared floor. In the mornings, guards would come to collect the dead from the cells. When they bring the food, it sounds like a battle in every cell. They take out the head of the cell, or two others, to be beaten. You hear sounds, your heart drops to the floor, you begin to shake, you can't control it. According to reports, many prisoners were sexually abused or forced to rape fellow inmates. Witnesses tell of continual, systematic torture and humiliation. In Saydnaya, you know you're not allowed to ever open your eyes with the guard in the room. So long as there's a guard in the cell, you have to cover your eyes like this. You just can't see the guard. The punishment is death. Anyone who removes their hand by mistake and sees the guard would be executed directly, so seeing them is really forbidden. But after years in prison, anyone would have experience. When you get to the bodies, you know how they've died and when they took their last breath. When you see a mark of rope around their neck in blue and red and their face is swollen. We can tell from the sound of the prisoner as he dies behind us. He dies a metre away. I don't see anything, but I see with my ears. Families of victims were never told what had happened to their loved ones. Amnesty says the abuses represent mass crimes against humanity and has called for the UN to take urgent action.
The human slaughterhouse inside Saydnaya prison in Syria. Want to go inside the report from Amnesty International tonight. I'm joined here at the big table by Renee Wildango from Amnesty International, and to my immediate right, to your right on your screen right now, you see Anwar al-Bunni. He's a human rights lawyer from Syria, one of the researchers for this report from Amnesty. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on the show tonight. Renee, before we even get into the report, what's in the report, the hangings, torture, nothing has stopped, right? I mean, it is still going on, maybe even as we speak right now.
Well, what we say in the report is that we can document these abuses until the end of 2015, but we have no indication that the torture And the mass hangings as well that the report talks about have stopped in the meantime. So unfortunately, we think that currently these horrendous abuses are going on. And what we want to do with this report, of course, is talk about how we can stop this situation. We have issued reports before talking about torture in Saydnaya, in other prisons related to the Syrian Secret Service, and we need these horrendous abuses to stop.
You've had reports before. We've reported on things, chemical weapons in Syria. We've reported on the atrocities in Aleppo numerous times. What makes this report different?
Well, I think if you look at the report, it has a new quality with this really systematic policy of extermination. You talked about it. These are civilians. These are people that protested against the government. The Syrian government here kills a part of the population that it considers to be enemies. This is a new quality. And of course, we have called for action before, but we seriously think that if the countries convene in Geneva to talk about a way forward to Syria, we need to address these human rights abuses as well. There will be no peace for Syria without addressing human rights.
Mr. al-Bunni, let me come to you now. You were instrumental in helping Amnesty get the information out about what's going on inside this prison. Talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, how is it possible to know what's going on there?
In fact, I involved to defense about political prisoners from 1990. So I defense about hundreds of political prisoners. They was in Saydnaya and other jails, include them two of my brothers. So
two of your brothers that were inside this prison.
And I visit this prison hundreds times to visit them. So and we have all relationship with the detainees who released. I just leave Syria at 2014.
Right.
All this time I defend and know what happened in Syria and this jail also. And myself, they put me for 5 years in jail because I spoke about one detainees died in Saydnaya under torture at 2006.
Right.
So we know that, and what happened in Saydnaya prison, it's part of what happened in whole the detainees place in whole Syria.
Well, talk to us about that. I mean, about what's going on there. I mean, just about what the soldiers are doing to the inmates. Tell me about that.
It's in whole the detainees place. First military jail in Syria, it's Saydnaya, and biggest one. And there is about more than 15,000 detainees there. And most of them civilian, because they present in front of military field court. So civilian people, not...
right, so these aren't soldiers, these are civilians who are being
most
put
of them
on trial.
civilian. There is some soldier who have military crime, but most of them civilian. They send them to the field military court.
Okay, which in itself is not legal, right?
Yeah, it's not legal because it's exception court.
Right.
And this court, in its law, any sentences with death must be signed by president.
So you're saying then that President Bashar al-Assad is
involved and responsible because he must to sign every decision with death.
Okay, I want to play for you now. We have a segment from the video that was released today by Amnesty about the prison, and we're going to come back to President Bashar al-Assad in just a second. But take a look at what Amnesty is showing us, or showing the world right now.
Saydnaya. Saydnaya. This horrible name. I wish they had killed me, rather than leave me to rot in this place. This is not a prison. It's a slaughterhouse. All this for what? Because I was critical of Assad and his cohort. I didn't take up arms. I didn't kill anyone. All I did was to go to a couple of demonstrations. So many of us went peacefully.
Right, so that's part of the tape that was released today. Mr. al-Bunni, you say that the president, Mr. Assad, he knows what's going on there. He's ordering it.
Sure.
Renee, let me ask you, can we prove that?
Yes, because the law of field military courts, the law who is published,
Yeah.
suppose any sentence with death signed by the president.
But if you're going to take this, try to take this to, for example, try to get Assad to go to the ICC, you're going to have evidence. I mean, have you got proof, Renee, that this information has been validated and has been filtered and vetted?
Well, Mr. al-Bunni already described the process. I mean, what we ultimately want to see, of course, is a process in front of the International Criminal Court.
Right.
And we all know that this is not currently unlikely due to the blockade in the Security Council. But what we can do is to make a step forward for accountability in Syria. It's not only about President Assad, who...
Yeah, but who's going to hold Mr. Assad accountable in Syria right now?
Yeah, nobody. Anybody in Syria. The laws in Syria banned to charge any officer, security officer or military officer. We cannot, until in front of the Syrian court, if any crime,
Right.
any security guard do any crime, we cannot charge him in front of the court. The law in Syria banned us from that.
Okay.
What we obviously need on a political level is pressure on the Syrian government from those who support it, which is Russia, which is Iran. And this is why I mentioned the Geneva talks. We need pressure on President Assad to stop these abuses. And ultimately, we need to put him on trial and others who are responsible for these abuses, too.
I want us to take a look now at what the president said yesterday in an interview with a Belgian reporter. Take a look.
Because the terrorists are attacking the people. I'm not only talking about ISIS and al-Nusra and all the al-Qaeda affiliated groups within Syria. When they attack civilians and killing civilians and beheading people and destroying properties, our constitutional duty and legal duty as government and as army and as state institutions is to defend the Syrian people.
Okay, so we've got Assad saying that his constitutional duty requires him to protect the Syrian people.
Kill them in the jail. That who protect himself, his regime, his authority, his chair as president. That's what he doing. This man is murder with laws, with the evidence, with the clear reports, not from Amnesty only. It's murder from the report of the Committee of Human Rights Council.
Mr. You know what you have been doing and your passion, it certainly is appreciated by a lot of people. But at the end of the day, what happens at the UN Security Council is really what matters, right? And nothing is happening. Even in December, there was a resolution, an attempted resolution, and it was vetoed. Who then, would you say, who or what is the biggest enemy of the Syrian people tonight outside of Syria, or maybe inside Syria?
In fact, my feel as Syrian, as lawyer, as live in Syria for long time, all the world now, enemy of Syrian civilian democracies. All the world destroyed and don't.
Well, because there was an action, but you know there are a lot of forces in the world that want to intervene and want to do something to help. But they're not. I mean, can you single out though a force, a country, a person that you consider to be the biggest blockade to helping civilians?
In fact, Daesh killed from Syria. Daesh, ISIS, killed from Syria about 3 until 5,000 people. This regime killed 500,000 Syrians.
I mean, the arguments are overwhelming, Renee, and still at the UN Security Council, paralysis.
Well, we're clearly also frustrated with this. It's not the first report we issue, and after every report we ask the world to add. I can understand also Mr. Bunni's frustration. The world has failed Syria, but again, this report has a new quality, and nevertheless urgently believe that this topic needs to be high on the political agenda. And those states who have a say in the conflict in Syria need to put it high on the agenda. And obviously, there are states that support the Syrian government.
Obviously, you mean Russia. Russia really...
Well, I also mean the German government, for example, who's part of the Syria talk and who can address this issue, and other countries who want to make a step forward towards accountability. We also have universal jurisdiction. Yes, the International Criminal Court is blocked, but we can, and by the way, Mr. al-Bunni is doing this with his organization and many other people. We're talking here in Germany, we have hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees here who went through this trauma. Many of these also became witnesses. There's lots of evidence to collect, and we can start with accountability right here and bring some of these crimes to court.
Mr. al-Bunni, you're an attorney. Yeah. Explain to me then what would happen. Let's say that the conflict is over and the rule of law is reinstated in Syria. How do you go about prosecuting people? I mean, what people would want to know first is inside this prison, who is responsible for the hangings? Are all of the prison guards, for example, are they all culpable for this?
In fact, the detainees' place, especially Saydnaya and security places, they choose the guards personally. They're responsible because they do that from themselves. They're happy to do that. The
So
guards,
they
torture
people.
the people, be happy when they torture the people. And also the head of the security branches or the guard, and the president also, because he signed the decision to the people dead. That for that, all of them responsible about what happened and knows. And unfortunately, now every 1 hour there is one Syrian detainees die in Syria. Until now, we thought there is more than 60,000 detainees die in the Syrian jails. Until now, there is no more than 200,000 detainees still in the regime jails. Until now, what happened? It's very important. This report now, it's come very clear and very specific, and describe what happened very, very clear about what happened in he describes the suffering of the detainees who pray to die.
And now, and all of these detainees...
To escape from this suffering.
I want to make sure, that we are clear with our audience. The people we're talking about here, who are the detainees, the people who are being hanged to death, these are people who have not necessarily committed a crime. We're not talking about murder. We're not talking about, grand theft. These are people...
or opposition.
It's just dissent, right? Yeah. They have been vocal in their opposition.
Or maybe hostage. There is kids, there is kids 13 and 12 and 14 age. There is kids as hostage. If they want you, arrested you, they don't find you, they will arrested all the family, your father, your mother, your brothers, your children, your wife.
It's a policy of the state, basically, murder as a policy.
Yeah,
right.
It's policy.
And when we were reading this report today, Renee, there were a lot of people who were struck that if this is to be stopped and people are to be brought to justice, it's very similar to what happened in 1945 after the Second World War. When you need evidence, you're talking about crimes against humanity. Can you foresee, would it be the ICC where the justice would be delivered then at some point in the future?
Well, ideally, of course, we would like to see this. I mean, we don't have to go back to 1945. We've gone through this since then many times, Yugoslavia, Rwanda. Right. Of course, we want to see the International Criminal Court to act. We know that it's currently very difficult, but we need political pressure. We are in a difficult situation. The International Criminal Court is in a difficult situation, also concerning other conflicts.
That's right.
But nevertheless, we as a human rights organization and activists, this is what we fight for.
What about the role of the United States? With Geneva, with the talks coming up, I mean, is there a message that you have, Mr. al-Bunni, for the new U.S. president, Mr. Trump?
I have message for all the world now. The report come in the time who very sensitive, because now there is somebody in the world think to reform this regime, think to rebuild some bridges.
Well, when you say reform, though, do you mean keeping Bashar al-Assad in power?
Yeah. Until now, Russia pushed for this, and somebody try to accept. And yesterday, as you say, there is Belgian parliament, and before it's French parliament. I suppose they must now, after this regime, they must watch their hands very, very clean because they check bloody.
So you don't think that there can be any reform of the system as long as Bashar al-Assad is president, right? Yeah. And so what we're talking about in Geneva, these peace talks, then, is that going to be on the table? I mean, Renee, is your organization pushing for that Bashar al-Assad must go before reform and repair can come to Syria?
Well, we're a human rights organization, so we don't have a political vision for the future of Syria, and this is for the parties to make this decision. But we clearly want to see human rights addressed in Geneva. We want to have this issue high on the agenda. And if you look at the past talks, it did not play a role. And we're talking about crimes against humanity.
Do you have a reason to hope, though, with the Geneva talks that will be different, that there will be parties there at the table who will bring this up? I mean, is there a reason to think that anything has changed?
Well, I know that some countries tried in the past, and I hope that this horrifying report and these news will play a role and will give activists a chance to push this issue high up on the agenda.
Mr. al-Bunni, I'll let you have the last word. What do you hope comes from Geneva?
I hope if they want to stop the war in Geneva and still dealing with Bashar al-Assad as murderer, they must to bring the Baghdadi and other IC and Nusra and bring them, all of them. Why they deal with one kind of biggest terrorist of part of Syria, biggest one, Bashar al-Assad and his regime, and Angor, the other, they bring Baghdadi and other IC and Nusra and everybody and PKK and bring them and deal with them.
Well, we'll see what happens. Mr. Anwar al-Bunni and Renee Wild-Angel from Amnesty International, to both of you gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time and sharing your passion with us as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.